Hello, I'm Heidi Safia Mirza and I am Professor of Race, Faith and Culture at Goldsmiths College, University of London, and also Professor Emerita at UCL Institute of Education. I'm really very delighted and honoured to speak to you today about a subject that's incredibly close to my heart, which is Black British feminism. It's been a subject and an activist movement that I've been involved in for the last 40 years. And I want to share with you some of the main ideas that shape Black British feminism. Firstly, why is it called Black British feminism as opposed to just Black feminism? So we know that there have been scholarship in the USA around African American Black feminist thought, the wonderful work of Patricia Hill Collins and Angela Davis and Kimberly Crenshaw very much speaks to the African American experience of women and class and race and gender and how they come together in the lived experience. But in Britain, we've had a different history, a different colonial history that has brought women from India, from Africa, from the Caribbean, from all over the world where the British colonies were. And it means that we were once there, but now we are here in Britain. So what does it mean to be British and Black? Can we be the one and the same? There was a huge controversy about this because England sees itself very much as a white nation. And white feminism, as it evolved in Britain, very much revolved around the needs and the experiences of white women. So, for example, they stressed the issues around the family, and the family was seen as oppressive for white women. It doesn't mean that it's not oppressive for women of colour, but they had other issues that were far more important. The white women in Britain in the 1960s and 70s were campaigning for abortion rights. Women of colour were saying, we just want the right to even just have children because of forced sterilisation. And I know from personal experience, when I had my daughter 40 years ago, that I was offered Depo-Provera, which we now know is a contraception, without my knowledge, so that, you know, migrant women could not procreate. And so we had different kinds of struggle. So it's about a different perspective from white feminism. And being Black in Britain can mean a myriad of things. And this can be controversial because women from India, Africa, and the Caribbean, from Latin American countries, from the Middle East, from all over the world, came under the umbrella of what it is to be Black, meaning not white in Britain. And this evolved in the 1950s and 60s as a kind of general umbrella term that can embrace women who are seen as different outside of the mainstream. And it became a powerful organizing tool. And there was a group of women who got together, and I was part of this movement called OWAD, the Organization of Women of African and Asian Descent. And it happened in it was 1978. I just finished university. I just had my daughter in a year or so later. And I came upon a poster that said, if you believe in the rights of women, women of colour, Black women, Asian women, come to the meeting in Brixton. And I went, and I'd never looked back because the energy in that room, the commitment to social change and the discussions around the experiences that we were having as carers, as workers in the NHS, in London Transport, in the canteens, in the cleaning jobs that women were doing, in the restructuring of the post-war state in Britain, meant that Black women's bodies were being used and abused for rebuilding Britain, but given no rights and no childcare, medical conditions were poor, and we were campaigning for that as a united front under the umbrella of Black British Feminism. Our founding mothers were incredibly powerful women and very much erased from the history and the telling of British feminism. So, for example, in 1911, there was a huge march for the suffragettes through London. I think it was about 70,000 women. It was huge, for the right of women to vote. And I never knew that there were Indian women suffragettes. Women from the colonies came to support the suffragette movement, yet they have been totally written out of the history of white feminism. I know that the Dilip Singh sisters campaigned for the suffragette movement, and I only found that out by mistake. Many years ago, I was in the Museum of London. I was working on a heritage project, on a commission, and I saw this postcard of the Indian women suffragettes. It just changed my whole view. And yet, when I looked up who they were, and I couldn't find very much at that time. There are now books written about it, which I'm very pleased about. When I looked up who they were, there was the Viceroy of India who commented what exotic creatures they were, how beautiful they looked in their saris. And they were constructed in opposition to white female sexuality and sense of gender. And they were seen as not legitimate subjects of struggle. It was as if the only people that were involved in the struggle were the white women. They were just a sideshow in their beautiful exotic clothes. And this construction of women of colour as exotic, as Jezebels, as indeed is happening to Meghan Markle at the moment, is something very much at the centre of Black British feminism. How we are constructed, how our lived experiences are negated, how we can restore a sense of justice and a voice for women of colour. There was a movie for the suffragettes, I think it was in 2015. It was on the big screen, Meryl Streep starred in it, and it highlighted the story of the white women suffragettes, but never mentioned the Asian women suffragettes. And I met the director of the movie, Sarah Gavron. We were sharing a platform together at the British Library, discussing women and women's rights. And I said to her directly on the stage, why did you not mention Asian women suffragettes? And she said they didn't fit the narrative. And this is the thing. We don't fit into the Black British people do not fit, and women do not fit into the narrative that the British have constructed about themselves in terms of the colonial history, where we were enslaved and indentured and moved around the world to produce, sugar and cocoa and coffee for the great English cup of tea. Yet we don't hear about the labour of women to make that cup of tea and the conditions in which they live. And that's the heart of Black British feminism, to expose that erasure. There are many founding mothers. There was Una Marsden. She was actually a journalist at the BBC in the 1940s, and she developed interest in the League of Coloured People here in Britain. So she was a campaigner of the very earliest post-war period. Then in the 1960s, we had Claudia Jones, who, in the backdrop of the Notting Hill riots, which was against migrants, she developed the West Indian Gazette and the Notting Hill Carnival. And she came from Trinidad, the same country that I am from. And so she's a proud sister who, made a huge impact on the lives of Caribbean women in Britain. And then there was Olive Morris, an activist. She belonged to the Black Panther movement. She campaigned against police harassment, and she was a powerful voice, but she died very early, and never got to see the fruits of her labour, which are now part of our Black feminist movement. And then there are other women like Jayaben Desai, and Jayaben Desai campaigned for the union rights of Asian women. She stood up against her white bosses at the Grunwick, which was a photo processing plant in the 1980s. And I know what that's like because I used to work at a photo processing plant when I first left the university. And it was a place that women of colour were treated very badly. We couldn't get up and go to the toilet. We had to ask permission to eat under very poor pay and conditions. And she campaigned long and hard, but the white unions wouldn't let women of colour into those unions, and this would be, the late 1970s. So it hasn't been long, the Black feminist movement, but the roots are deep, and we have ongoing social action for Say Her Name, which campaigning for the rights of women in custody, just as we have Black Lives Matter.